In the winter of 1941, as dawn broke late over the frozen plains of the Eastern Front, the temperature fell below -30 degrees. The sun rose weak and pale, barely cutting through the white haze that hung over forests, villages, and endless fields of snow. Somewhere between Smolensk and Moscow, thousands of German soldiers stood motionless in the half-light, their breath forming thick clouds that froze to scarves, collars, and unshaven faces. Rifles burned bare hands with cold. Engines refused to start. Boots stiffened like stone. And far behind the front lines, in warm headquarters lined with maps and radios, Adolf Hitler issued orders that would seal their fate. The campaign had begun with thunder. In June, the German invasion of the Soviet Union tore open the largest front the world had ever seen. Entire armies were shattered in weeks. Columns of prisoners marched east and west under the summer sun. German commanders believed the war was already won. Moscow would fall before winter. The Soviet state would collapse under the weight of speed, surprise, and fear. But as autumn turned to winter, that illusion bled away with every frozen corpse left beside the road. By December, the German advance had slowed to a crawl. Supply lines stretched for hundreds of miles over destroyed railways and muddy tracks that froze overnight into jagged ice. Fuel was scarce, ammunition arrived late or not at all. Winter uniforms had never been issued in sufficient numbers. Many soldiers still wore thin coats meant for autumn, their breath rasping through cracked lips as frostbite ate fingers and toes. Yet from Berlin came no permission to pull back, no allowance for retreat. Hitler had decided that retreat was defeat, and defeat was unthinkable. The orders were secret, transmitted through chains of command with rigid clarity. Units were to hold their positions at all costs. Ground already taken was sacred. No withdrawal without explicit authorization, no matter the weather, no matter the losses. For the men at the front, this meant one thing. They would stand still while the world around them froze solid and the enemy gathered strength in the darkness. Snow fell endlessly. It buried the dead where they lay. It covered shattered tanks and abandoned trucks, smoothing the battlefield into a quiet white plain, broken only by blackened trees and the smoke of distant fires. At night, the cold became a living force. Men huddled together in shallow foxholes, listening to the wind scream across the steppe. The ground was too hard to dig deeper. Fires were forbidden. Smoke would reveal positions. Sleep came in short, dangerous bursts. Many never woke again. Across the lines, Soviet forces moved with growing confidence. Reinforcements arrived from the east, hardened troops pulled from Siberia and the far north. They wore white camouflage suits and heavy boots. They skied silently through forests the Germans had never learned to navigate. Their rifles functioned in temperatures that shattered German lubricants into useless paste. They attacked at dawn, at dusk, in blizzards so thick men could barely see their own hands. German commanders on the ground understood the danger. They sent desperate messages up the chain, warning that their units were exhausted, under strength, freezing to death. They requested permission to shorten the lines, to fall back to defensible positions where supplies could reach them and men might survive the winter. The replies came back cold and absolute. Hold, stand fast. Victory depends on your resolve. In villages along the front, civilians watched the occupation crumble into chaos. Wooden houses were stripped of doors, floors, even roof beams, as soldiers searched for fuel. Barns were burned, leaving families homeless in the snow. Livestock was slaughtered in frozen yards. The war no longer moved forward, it consumed everything where it stood. One infantryman wrote in his diary by candlelight, his pencil shaking from cold. He described how a comrade had fallen asleep on sentry duty and froze solid before morning. How another had screamed as a medic amputated blackened toes with a saw meant for wood. He wrote of hunger, of eating frozen bread chipped apart with bayonets, of the silence after artillery fire when the snow absorbed all sound. He never wrote another entry. As December deepened, Soviet counterattacks grew stronger. Entire German divisions were struck from multiple directions, cut off from supply, surrounded in pockets of snow and smoke. Radios failed. Messengers froze on the road. Units fought on with what they had, clinging to ruined villages and forest edges because the orders demanded it. The word retreat became forbidden, spoken only in whispers. In some sectors, officers chose to disobey. They pulled their men back under cover of darkness, abandoning heavy weapons to save lives. In others, obedience ruled. Companies were reduced to platoons, platoons to handfuls of men. The ground became littered with frozen bodies locked in the positions where they had been told to stand. The disaster was not announced. There were no speeches to mark it, no medals for survival. Reports sent to Berlin were filtered, losses minimized, the truth buried beneath phrases about temporary setbacks and heroic resistance. Yet the scale was immense. By the end of the winter, hundreds of thousands were dead, wounded, or missing. Many had never fired a shot in their final weeks, killed instead by cold, exhaustion, and an order that valued ground over life. In the frozen forests west of Moscow, the war changed forever. The myth of invincibility shattered quietly, without ceremony. German soldiers who survived would remember the sound of trees cracking in the cold, the endless white horizon, the feeling of waiting for an enemy they could not see, while their own strength drained away hour by hour. They would remember the knowledge that help would not come, because somewhere far away a decision had been made. The winter of 1941 did not end with a single battle or a clear line on a map. It ended slowly as days grew longer and the snow began to melt, revealing what lay beneath. Wrecked vehicles, shallow graves, the remnants of units that had once marched east in confidence and song. The secret orders remained in effect, shaping every movement, every loss, long after the worst of the cold had passed. And for the thousands who never returned, who vanished into the snow without names or markers, the disaster remained forgotten, hidden behind the silence of official reports and the relentless forward motion of a war that would only grow larger, darker, and more unforgiving. As January tightened its grip, the cold became systematic, merciless, unrelenting. The snow no longer fell softly. It was driven sideways by wind that cut through cloth and flesh alike. Frost crept into weapons, into joints, into lungs. The act of breathing itself became painful. Men wrapped rags around their faces until they were stiff with ice, then tore them away when they froze solid against skin. The front line was no longer a line. It was a scattering of isolated strongpoints, villages reduced to blackened skeletons, trenches that disappeared beneath drifting snow. Communication between units collapsed into fragments. Orders arrived late, if they arrived at all. But one instruction never changed: hold your ground. In forest clearings, German artillery crews hammered frozen breech blocks with rifle butts to free them. When guns finally fired, the recoil shattered weakened metal. Shells detonated weakly or not at all. Horses collapsed in their traces, their bodies left where they fell, half buried by morning. The smell of decay vanished in the cold, replaced by the sharp, clean scent of ice and pine. Soviet forces pressed closer. They attacked supply columns at night, slipping through gaps the Germans could no longer patrol. They struck headquarters, field kitchens, medical stations. The war seeped into every rear area, leaving no place of safety. Wounded men were evacuated on sleds, their moans muffled by blankets and snow, many dying before they reached help that no longer existed. Inside a shattered church used as a dressing station, medics worked with numb fingers. Morphine was scarce, bandages froze. blood turned black almost instantly. There was no time for gentleness. Limbs were amputated to save lives, or because gangrene had already claimed them. Some men begged not to be cut, others begged to be killed. The medics worked on, their faces expressionless, knowing that the next wave of wounded was already on its way. Hitler's orders grew harsher as the situation worsened. Any unauthorized withdrawal was labeled cowardice. Officers who pulled back without permission faced court-martial. The word "stand fast" echoed through radio messages and written directives, stripped of context, stripped of mercy. The battlefield became a test not of strategy, but of obedience. Some commanders tried to interpret the orders creatively, rotating units out of the worst positions under the guise of local adjustments. Others followed them to the letter. Entire battalions vanished in the process, erased by encirclement and annihilation. Their disappearance was noted only as numbers on a report, their suffering compressed into lines of type. In one sector, a company held a frozen ridge overlooking a road choked with snow. They had been there for weeks. Their uniforms were in tatters, boots wrapped with rags torn from blankets. Ammunition was rationed to a handful of rounds per man. When Soviet infantry advanced through the fog at dawn, the Germans fired until their rifles jammed, then fought with bayonets and entrenching tools. By noon, the ridge was silent. When a relief patrol reached it days later, they found only frozen bodies locked in combat, preserved exactly as they had fallen. The psychological toll was as deadly as the cold. Men stopped speaking. Eyes grew hollow. The sound of artillery became background noise, barely registered. Hope narrowed to simple thoughts of warmth, of sleep, of the war somehow ending before the next sunrise. Many began to believe they would never leave the snow, that the white horizon would be the last thing they ever saw. Letters from home arrived sporadically, carried by messengers who risked their lives to deliver words that now felt like echoes from another world. Families wrote of normal life, of rationing, of faith in victory. The men read them by flickering light, then folded them carefully and placed them inside coats close to their hearts, as if paper might provide warmth. As February approached, the Soviet counteroffensive widened. Entire German corps were pushed back mile by mile, despite the orders. The Red Army paid a terrible price, advancing over open ground under fire, but they kept coming. For them, the winter was an ally. For the Germans, it was an executioner. The retreat, when it finally came, was chaotic and unplanned. Units pulled back simultaneously without coordination, clogging roads already buried in snow. Vehicles stalled and were abandoned. Artillery was spiked and left behind. Wounded were loaded onto anything that moved, many slipping off sleds and trucks into the drifts, never to rise again. Behind them, the battlefield told its own story. Trenches filled with snow and bodies, weapons frozen into hands, helmets half buried like markers for graves that would never be dug. The land itself seemed to mourn, silent beneath the endless white. The disaster was not confined to one place. It stretched along hundreds of miles of front, from the outskirts of Leningrad to the approaches of Moscow. Different units, different commanders, the same fate. A winter underestimated, an enemy misjudged, orders that demanded sacrifice without limit. In Berlin, the full truth remained hidden. Propaganda spoke of resilience, of heroic stands against overwhelming odds. The suffering was reframed as proof of strength. The frozen dead were absorbed into a narrative of destiny and resolve. There was no acknowledgement of error, no admission that human lives had been expended to uphold an illusion. For the soldiers who survived, the winter of 1941 became a permanent wound. Even years later, they would remember the cold more vividly than the fighting, the way it invaded dreams, the way it silenced screams, the way it turned men into shapes beneath the snow. As spring approached and the ice began to thaw, the ground softened, releasing the smell of decay. Bodies that had been frozen solid now emerged from the drifts. Burial details worked in silence, laying comrades into shallow graves marked with wooden crosses that would soon rot away. Many were never identified. Many were never buried at all. The front stabilized eventually, but nothing was the same. The German army that emerged from the winter was weakened, scarred, and haunted. The belief in quick victory was gone, replaced by grim endurance. The secret orders had achieved nothing but delay, at a cost measured in lives that would never be counted accurately. The war moved on, to new battles, new fronts, new catastrophes. But the forgotten disaster of 1941 remained embedded in the memory of those who endured it, a lesson written in frost and blood, a moment when silence, cold, and obedience combined to claim thousands, unseen and unremembered, beneath the snow. The thaw did not relieve. It brought mud. Snow dissolved into thick, clinging earth that swallowed boots, carts, and exhausted men alike. Roads vanished. Rivers overflowed their banks. What the winter had frozen solid, spring now turned into a slow-moving trap. Retreating columns stretched for miles, inching forward through brown sludge under low, gray skies. The sound of artillery followed them like distant thunder, a reminder that the enemy was still close, still advancing. Units that had survived the cold now faced collapse from exhaustion. Men marched until they fell, then were dragged to the side of the road and left behind. Horses that had endured months of starvation finally gave out, their bodies stripped within hours for meat. Discipline eroded, not through rebellion, but through sheer physical ruin. Orders were still issued, they were still stamped with authority, but fewer and fewer soldiers had the strength to carry them out. Soviet pressure never ceased. Attacks came in waves, probing weak points, exploiting confusion. German rear guards fought desperate delaying actions in villages already destroyed twice over. Houses changed hands repeatedly, walls collapsing under shell fire, cellars filling with wounded and dying men who could no longer be moved. Civilians hid wherever they could, trapped between armies, listening to the same streets echo with different languages, different boots, different commands. In one ruined town, a group of German soldiers took shelter in a schoolhouse. Children's drawings still clung to the walls, bright colors against soot and bullet holes. The men slept on desks, clutching rifles even in dreams. When Soviet artillery struck before dawn, the building collapsed inward. Those who survived clawed their way out through debris and smoke, only to be met by rifle fire from the street. By morning, the school was silent again. The scale of loss became impossible to hide at the front. Replacement units arrived already under strength, composed of young recruits and older men pulled from reserves. They listened in silence to veterans who spoke little, who stared at nothing, who warned them only of the cold and the orders that would not bend. Some understood immediately, others learned too late. Medical units were overwhelmed, field hospitals filled beyond capacity, corridors lined with stretchers. Infection spread quickly in the damp spring air. Supplies lagged behind the moving front. Surgeons worked without rest, hands stained, eyes hollow. Outside, rows of newly dug graves lengthened day by day, marked hastily before the units moved on again. The secret orders remained unrevoked. Even as reality contradicted them, they shaped every decision. Ground was still to be held, even when it offered no advantage. Retreats were to be justified, explained, excused. Lives were weighed against symbols on maps, against the idea of willpower overpowering material reality. The result was a war fought against nature, against an enemy, and against common sense, all at once. For the Soviets, the winter victory carried its own scars. Their losses were immense. Entire units had been sacrificed in frontal assaults. But momentum was now on their side. The invader had been stopped, pushed back, shown to be mortal. That knowledge spread through their ranks like warmth after a long night. For the Germans, the memory of 1941 became a dividing line. Before it, there had been confidence, belief, even arrogance. After it, There was only endurance. Men no longer spoke of when the war would end, only of surviving the next week, the next march, the next attack. As summer approached, the front hardened again. New offensives were planned, new promises were made. But beneath the movement and noise, the quiet disaster of the winter lingered. In mass graves beneath thawed earth, in missing names on rolls, in men who flinched at cold rain because it reminded them of snow. The secret orders faded from immediate memory, replaced by new directives, new catastrophes. They were never publicly acknowledged as a mistake. No single moment marked their end, but their consequences remained, woven into the fabric of the war. A reminder that decisions made far from the front can echo across frozen fields, into trenches, into the final moments of men who never knew why they were ordered to stand and die. The war pressed forward as if the winter had never happened, yet its shadow followed every step. Along the rebuilt lines, new trenches were dug into soil that still held fragments of the dead. Helmets, bones, scraps of fabric surfaced with every spadeful of earth. Men worked without comment, already accustomed to the presence of those who had fallen before them. Summer brought heat and insects, but the memory of cold never fully released its grip. Veterans measured every night by how quickly darkness fell, every breeze by how sharp it felt against the skin. When rain came, sudden and heavy, men stiffened, reminded of blizzards that had erased sound and direction. The body remembered what the mind tried to bury. Commanders spoke of renewed strength, of lessons learned. New equipment arrived, new formations took shape. Yet beneath the surface, the damage remained. Units that had been shattered were reassembled from fragments, strangers placed side by side where friends had once stood. Trust was thinner now, authority quieter, obedience more mechanical than loyal. In villages retaken and abandoned again, civilians returned to ruins that no longer felt like home. Fields were littered with unexploded shells and shallow graves. Children grew up playing among wreckage, learning early the shapes of war. The winter of 1941 was not a story told openly, but it lived in absence, in the faces of men who never came back, in the silence that followed certain questions. On the Eastern Front, the fighting intensified with every passing month. New disasters would come, larger and louder, drawing the world's attention. The winter catastrophe receded into the background, overshadowed by names that would later define the war. Yet for those who endured it, it remained singular, a time when nature and command aligned against them, when survival depended less on skill than on chance. At night, in brief moments of rest, some men spoke of it in low voices, of standing guard while ice formed on eyelashes, of comrades who simply sat down and refused to move, too tired to care what followed, of the sound a frozen body made when it was moved, stiff and unnatural. These memories were shared rarely and only with those who would understand. The front lines shifted again. Orders changed tone, if not intent. Flexibility was allowed where it had once been forbidden. The cost of rigidity had become undeniable, though never openly admitted. The war adapted, slowly, painfully, carrying its scars forward. Far from the battlefield, in offices and halls of power, maps were redrawn, arrows erased and replaced. The winter of 1941 became a statistic, a difficult period, a test overcome. The language was careful, distant. It did not speak of frost-bitten hands or frozen screams. It did not speak of the men who vanished into snowdrifts, unnamed and unseen. As years passed, the survivors aged beyond the war. Some carried wounds that never healed. Others carried memories they could not escape. When winter came, when temperatures dropped and snow fell heavy and quiet, many felt themselves transported back to that endless white, to the feeling of waiting for an order that offered no hope. The disaster remained where it had always been, not in official histories, not in grand speeches, but in the quiet knowledge of those who had stood still while the world froze around them. A moment carved into time by secrecy, obedience, and loss, stretching onward through the war, long after the snow had melted and the ground had swallowed the evidence. Even as the war moved toward its final years, echoes of that winter surfaced without warning. In later battles, when orders came down that demanded impossible holds or absolute sacrifice, some men felt the old fear return, sharp and immediate. They obeyed because obedience had been carved into them by cold and loss, but something inside had already learned the cost. In prisoner camps scattered across the East, survivors of encircled units remembered the winter as the beginning of everything that followed. Hunger there was different, slower, but the cold felt the same. At night, wrapped in thin blankets, they dreamed of snowfields and woke with their teeth chattering, unsure for a moment whether they were still alive. The land itself bore witness. Years later, long after the guns fell silent, farmers would uncover rifles while plowing, or fragments of uniforms fused into the soil. Bones surfaced after heavy rains, pale against dark earth. The winter of 1941 refused to stay buried, rising again and again, demanding to be seen. For historians, it became a footnote between invasions and counteroffensives. For those who lived it, it was a boundary in time, before and after. Before, the cold stripped away illusion. After, when survival replaced belief. The secret orders that had sent thousands to stand and freeze were never read aloud in judgment. They dissolved into archives and vanished behind greater crimes, greater catastrophes. But their effect lingered in every quiet grave beneath the eastern sky, in every family that waited for a return that never came. And so the forgotten disaster endured, not as a single moment, but as a long, silent presence within the war itself. A season where ambition met reality, where command met nature, and where countless lives were extinguished without witness, leaving behind only snow, silence, and the memory of standing fast while everything else fell away.